Welcome to Leadership Development News, Profiles and Practice of Top Performers. I'm Dr. Relly Nadler. Dr. Kathy Greenberg, my esteemed host, will not be with us today, but between Kathy and I, we have helped thousands of leaders to perform in the top 10%. We've been doing this show now for 18 years, and we always are looking for tools, tips to help you be a top performer. That's defined by being in the top 10%. Are you in the top 10%? If not, some of these tools that we're talking about on the show, and especially today, we're going to be talking about the rising leader, turning high achievers into effective leaders. We're going to be talking with Mark Silverman. I'll give you his intro in a moment. But you may be a high achiever. Are you actually an effective leader? And so we'll tap Mark for that. And so some of the reason that we're doing this, everything is more now. And people that I work with as an executive coach or as a speaker or a trainer, we're on overwhelm all the time. We have all these emotions. Most people don't know what to do with emotions. So we're like have an abundance of emotions, like, yeah, what am I supposed to do with all this? The pressure, the stress, the expectations that your direct reports, if you're a leader or in your family, that they have of you, that somehow you're going to navigate all of this. And it's really challenging. And so any of the small things you can do, one, to manage yourself, and then also to manage others. And so a lot of what we talk about, and we're going to talk about today with Mark, falls in the category of emotional intelligence. Why do we like that? It's pretty basic. What do you know about yourself? How do you manage yourself? What do you know about others? How do you manage others? And then there's competencies and skills, and Mark's got some really good things that we're going to be able to zero in on in any one of those four categories: managing yourself, or what do you know about yourself? Managing yourself. What do you know about others? Managing others. One of the things that we like to talk about is all of us need more support. So given everything that's going on today, Gallup tells us that 75% of us need more support. That's you. That's me. That's Mark. And who are those people that we get support from? And then when we talk about leaders and some of the research on leaders, we all know you should recognize good work. Well, research, managers say, oh, yeah, I do that all the time, 59% of the time. When we ask your direct reports, they go, only about 35%. So that's a 24% difference of what you think you're doing, what's getting received. And then the other aspect that hopefully you're doing as a leader is giving weekly feedback. Managers, oh yeah, about 50% say I do that, regularly. Only 20% of your direct reports think they got feedback. Again, that's a 30% gap. So those are some of the things that we're going to look into around the rising leader. And let me give you Mark's introduction here. So Mark has heeded the call into the sphere of coaching and speaking from a successful career in technology. And in his corporate tenure, Mark generated 90 million in sales for a fast growing startup by bringing together executives, tech leaders, stakeholders to close complex multi-million-dollar deals. So he's really got an interesting background around the sales side. And he's enjoyed a consistent roster of executive coaching from CEOs to senior leaders, helping them have a greater impact. So we're going to resonate with that. And then we're going to zero in on the Rising Leaders Handbook, turning high achievers into effective leaders. We talked about that early on. And then his other book, Only 10s 2.0, Confront Your To-Do List, Transform Your Life. So Mark's got a lot of interesting information that he's going to share with us. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited. Looking at all of your materials, we're such kindred spirits. It's natural that we should be having a conversation.
That's great, and that's what I love about this. And also, you have a podcast.
I do.
And so maybe I'll ask you about that in a moment. But let us start off with kind of a little bit of history. Like what brought you, who brought you to kind of where you are today? Like what are some of the, sometimes and maybe you may have this conversation with folks, like some of these defining moments, the key
Mhm.
people that kind of helped you direct to where you are.
I joke often that the only reason people have me on stages or bring me on podcasts is because my origin story is at 27 years old, I was homeless and living in my truck. I was an alcoholic and a drug addict and basically, a pretty much a loser at life. And it was getting sober and starting to create a life probably a decade later than most people do that informed the way I looked at success. So I went from homeless, alcoholic drug addict guy to millionaire in several years. So I got whiplash, but I found myself in this beautiful $1 million house, right? Driving a sports car, two kids, a wife, and all that stuff pretty quickly after not having anything. Committee chair for the Boy Scouts and the third grade basketball coach, and just never, ever, ever feeling like I fit in anywhere. I worked with CEOs. I knew millionaires and billionaires and successful people. I would go to these sales club trips on these exotic islands and hang out with all these these college lacrosse player guys and these women who just could eat my lunch up and down when it came to pedigree. So I always had this internal self-consciousness that people would see that I didn't belong. So I dressed it up with Hugo Boss suits and a gold watch and all that stuff. But the way I became a coach was after becoming successful, after getting married and having kids, somewhere around like 45, 46, 47, it all started to fall apart. It all started to come
Mhm.
like that. Those insides didn't match the outsides. And
Right.
I hadn't dealt with the traumas and the childhood stuff that had driven me to homelessness. And then the other, the drives that made me successful, which was no one's ever going to see me that homeless guy again. Those drives were kind of empty also. So at about 48 years old, I wound up, my marriage ended. I started getting sick. I started having panic attacks. So here I
Wow.
was, like this boss ass sales guy, walking into the C-suite of every major corporation, and then I would see someone I worked with for years, and I would have a panic attack and have to run into the bathroom before the CEO saw me, and then I would sweat in the middle of meetings, and my sales career just tanked. What happened was I got really, 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 really sick. Thought I was going to die. And I didn't know what to do because nothing I was doing for sales was working. Nothing that I was doing for my health was working. My marriage had fallen apart. And I was suppressed, depressed, and suicidal. Because every good origin story starts that way. I'm a short Jewish Tony Robbins, right? I was in that one room apartment, and then I studied leadership and success. But what happened was I decided that I was going to do something drastic for my kids when faced with tragedy and they saw me struggling. I decided I was going to run the Marine Corps Marathon. Even though I couldn't run a mile, I was going to make $1 million and give that to my ex-wife. So if I died, she got that money, and I was going to give $60,000 to charity just to make up for the fact that I was a loser. And that year, I did all three of those things. I ran the
Wow.
marathon. I made the money. I gave the money to charity. I was healthier than I ever was. My career took off again. But the funny thing was that while I was training for the marathon, I was listening to every self-help book, every spiritual book, right? Every
Ah,
positive psychology book I could
right,
get my
right.
hands on. I was listening to this. I was journaling. I learned to meditate. I just started to build a new Mark Silverman from that crash and burn, which is why I have such a soft spot for people in midlife, right? For me, those
Yeah.
people in midlife trying to balance all those things that you were talking about, and why I'm an executive coach, is when I built myself back and my career was on fire, I was like an ex-smoker. I couldn't shut up about the fact that success was killing us. The
Yeah.
drives and motivations that we were using to be successful were, I was watching marriages crumble. I was watching addictions. I was watching all this stuff happen around me. And that's the price we paid to be in the 1%. So uh, it was Alan Cohen, this author, who I was going to go to one of his retreats, and he said, Mark, you should come to my coaching program. I have a hunch about you. And I'm like, what's coaching? I don't know what coaching is. and the rest was history. My ex-wife is who depended on me was the one who says you should be a coach. You should be teaching people what you learned. Uh,
Hmm.
she pushed me into this, and that was 12 years ago. And
Really?
so now,
Wow.
so I care about people's success. I care about people getting promotions. I care about all that stuff. But more importantly, I care about people having sustainable,
Yeah.
thriving lives, relationships. I got a text on Saturday night from a client that I coach in Europe. And, he's with this woman for 10 years. They have two kids together and they're not married. And I've been so overstepping as a coach. I got him to CEO. He was promoted to CEO, but I was shaming him about not marrying his girlfriend, and he sent me the
Shaming,
engagement.
shaming
He's
strategy.
shaming is a total coach tool, mostly because he wanted to do it. He just was scared,
Right. Right.
and I was like, dude, like I cannot end this coaching agreement until you're engaged. I am a complete failure. I don't care that you're CEO. I don't care that we gave you all these tools. Do this, and he just sent me the engagement picture Saturday night, and I was like, I can die a happy man now because now he's got it all. Now he's got success in every area of his life, right?
So what a great story, and I can see on stage and the whole hero's journey, from wherever you've been. So take us back. So it sounds like you had two kind of really down moments from homeless and then losing it again. How did you? Because I'm all about what do you do in the moment? So what's your self-talk in the moment? Like let's say when you were homeless, somehow something happened and you made a change. And I imagine some of the change was how you were talking to yourself to say, I don't know, that's it, or like what was it? Like, what was it? And then
Actually,
what you
it
said.
was none of that. It was none of that. My brother was here in Washington D.C. I was living in my truck. He said, "Come here to borrow some money." So I drove all the way across country because I was in Seattle, Washington. I drove all the way here to borrow money from him because this was before you could Venmo someone, right? This was even before the internet. It was
Okay.
1989. That's that's will date myself, and so I came here to borrow money, and he said, you should live with me. And while you're living with me, you're going to go to AA meetings and you're going to go to NA meetings and you're going to
Okay.
enroll in college and you're going to go to the gym. I was like, I got nothing else to do. I'm 135 pounds. I got no place to go. He owned a bunch of restaurants and had cool friends. So that's where that started.
Oh,
But the piece that ignited me was I realized that I didn't have a role model for what kind of a life I wanted to have. I remember in an early AA meeting, I said, I'm striving to be an average Joe. If I could be an average Joe, that would be an amazing
okay.
thing for me. Right. So I looked for role models of
Yeah.
what kind of a
Yeah.
life would I want? Because I didn't even know what that would be.
Yeah. Well, then you referenced, Tony Robbins, and he's all about looking at role models. If they can do it, you can do it. I know earlier in my career, I worked in a treatment unit, so I'm familiar with how powerful the AA meetings are, and having sponsors, and having someone who can give you the tough love. So going back to the second time, that you kind of created yourself, you ran the marathon. You made $1 million. What was your self-talk like then?
Don't die. Don't die. Don't die. Don't do this to your kids. Because I wanted to die. And I could not do that to my kids. My ex-wife and I made a pact because she was also depressed. When we broke up, it destroyed both of us. We made a pact that we were both committed to the kids. We were
Yeah.
both committed to
Okay.
being the best parents and co-parents we could. So we strived every minute. So both of us credit that climbing out of the hole for that commitment.
So having that why, we talk about
Mhm.
Simon Sinek and other people, that sense of why, that's that drive. I just got off a supervision class I lead for coaches for a coaching school, and people present cases, and one of the cases was about somebody who wasn't doing the homework in coaching, and a lot of the conversation, not just me but others, was what's the why? Why should you do that? And the other side of the why is the positive side. What if you don't do that? And
Mm.
so I was talking about motivation. What if you don't do that? So what if you didn't change? I'm sure that was a motivation for you.
That would be a completely different world for my children. My
Yeah.
brother, who got me sober, died 2 years ago. Drugs and alcohol.
Oh,
Uh,
really? Ooh.
and he's the one who saved. Like none of this would have happened if it wasn't for him.
Yeah.
And my sons are adults now, but the effect on them as adults, I can only see what the effect would have been if that happened to him or me when they were children, and what kind of a trajectory they would have had. Now they understand addiction. Now they understand, mental illness, so that they can metabolize that. But if they were teenagers, I don't know. I
Yeah.
wouldn't want that for them.
Wow. Well, that's a really strong why, and I imagine you're doing great stuff with coaching. So let's get into some of the things around uh, your book. One of the things that you have in the introduction was skydiving in the office. You challenge the notion that corporate jobs have to be soul crushing. We're going to go to a break in a minute or two, but just define soul crushing, and then we'll go to our break.
That was something I took from a gentleman named Boyd Vardy, who is he leads safaris in Africa, and he talked about how he would have these corporate people come on these safaris and see the dead in their eyes and the soul crushing jobs. And I was like listening to him and going, yeah, no, absolutely. And they're like, wait a second, you don't have to go skydiving or go on a safari and be face to face with a lion to feel that quickening and that immediacy in life. Why don't you speak your truth? Like speak up in a meeting and disagree, or go for a promotion, or do something that you're not qualified for, or tell the truth to your spouse. You'll that's a lot more immediate than jumping out of an airplane. So I thought, if you could use the office, if you could use your boss and your coworkers as fodder for your personal growth and your edge, that's as good as any surfing trip. Not as pretty, but it's good for personal growth.
Great. I'll just make a comment and then we'll go to break. But I think in those moments, we all know when we're feeling uncomfortable, I should do this. And then typically we don't. And so it's kind of capturing that and doing something different in the moment.
Hmm.
So we're going to go to our first break, Mark. We're listening to Leadership Development News, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Leadership Development News, profiles of top performers. We're talking to a top performer in his life, a top performer as a coach, Mark Silverman. And Mark, your website is marksilverman.com, right?
MarkJSilverman.com. The letter
Mark
J
J.
needs to be in
Silverman.
there.
Okay, we got the J. And before we get into your book, you got a podcast, and I know we've talked about this before we got on the air. I mean, it's so much fun because if you like talking and you like conversing and you like learning, podcasts are perfect for that. So tell us a little bit about your podcast. I think you have a couple of them, don't you?
I've had 3 podcasts. I started with Mastering Midlife: How to Thrive When the World Asks Most of You, as we spoke about. That's who I was drawn to, is how do I help people not drown in that part of life. I don't have 18 years under my belt. I do have 700 plus episodes. Then I switched it to Mastering Overwhelm because my book was so successful. I decided to kind of lean into that, the Only Tens book. Which, by the way, that Only Tens book, we talked about overwhelm in your introduction. It's free on my website. So if you go to my website, click on resources, you can get a free copy. I'll send you a hard copy if you'd like, or an electronic copy. Now we rebranded everything, because when we wrote the book, the Rising Leader Handbook, it was a challenge by someone who was working on my marketing. Is like, what do you do every day, all day? And then Mastering Midlife and all this stuff is not what I do all day, every day. I coach leaders, I teach. And when I looked at my roster of clients, it's usually fast rising high achievers who made it to the C-suite so quickly that they didn't have a chance to learn those other skills, that they didn't get a chance to learn that success through others is the skill that they need now more than anything else, because they got by on all, on their drive, on their expertise, on their subject matter, knowledge. And now they had to kind of let go of that and let people who may not do as good a job as they did do the job, and then lead them to those heights. So that's why we wrote the book. It's basically conversations that I've had both on my podcast and conversations I've had with my clients live in the book.
Wow. And that is the big thing, from the individual contributor, the driver, and then realizing, as you know, and I know, the success. In the Rising Leader, you have very similar to what I said about those components, those 4 components of emotional intelligence: leading up, leading across, leading your team, leading you. I mean, each of those kind of fit right in there. So tell me about what kind of first start, and I think in the EI model, and you probably see this too, you got to start with yourself. So leading yourself, like, what are some of the key things as a coach you would inquire about, you would zero in on in kind of leading yourself?
It's funny because I got a lot of crap for putting leading up first and leading yourself last, and I did that on purpose. We can talk about that in a moment. But so for me, leading yourself, and you talk about it in emotional brilliance and emotional intelligence, is like, let's learn about the person. So you have a chemistry call. Tell me your story. Let me find out everything about you, childhood, who'd you want love from, all that stuff. So we have an interview that way. Then I do Enneagram. Personality testing really helps to see core motivations, fears, triggers, that kind of thing. And I find Enneagram to kind of like be psychic. Like, Enneagram is crazy good when it's done well.
So I'm familiar with it. I haven't gotten trained in it, but I'm very familiar. My daughter, who's getting the master's in psychology, turned me on to it. So what number are you?
I'm an Enneagram 2. I am the happy helper. I get my worth by how much value I provide other people. And that's such a lovely trait. Now, the downside and the dark side of that is it's a transaction. You better tell me you can't live without me. Otherwise, this isn't a full transaction. So it's so interesting. So my biggest fear is not providing value. Like, if you weren't smiling and enjoying this, all of a sudden I would go, oh my God, I'm not doing a good job for him. Like, people aren't going to like this. And it's more than just self-consciousness. It's right. I am, so an achiever, an Enneagram 3, which is the achiever, they get their self-worth from their achievements, from achieving goals and looking good. So it's all those core motivations. And then the last piece that we do is a 360, which as an executive coach, we talk to peers, we talk to bosses, we talk to people who work for them. Sometimes I even talk to wives or husbands, and get a full picture of the whole thing. The cool thing about having these tools, the Enneagram and the 360, is I can depersonalize some of the behavior. Actually come around the table and talk to my client and say, hey, look at this. Like, look, as an Enneagram 8, a driver, right? Your energy precedes you in the room. And now it's not a fault of theirs. It's just, wow, your energy just precedes you in the room. So people are already intimidated by you. We might want to dial that back a little bit. So that kind of thing.
Beautiful. Well, part of I'm smiling because what number do you think I am?
I can't tell, and I can't tell, and I'm up, but I'm going to say you're a 7.
No, I'm a 2.
Okay.
When you talked about us kind of being able to resonate, and exactly what you're saying, and I also, like, the main tool I use a lot is the Myers-Briggs, and so similar to a 2 is an NF in a Myers-Briggs, and it's only about 8 to 10% of the population. But just like you said, for the longest time, I had a partner who was an MBA from Harvard, and he was an NT in Myers-Briggs term, and if you wanted to give him a compliment, it was saying how smart he was, how clever. And for me, probably similar to you, because I think the 2 and the maybe NF is similar,
I'm
was,
an
wow.
NF also, yeah. So yeah.
Oh, okay. So the NF part would be, wow, no one really could say it like you just said it. It's that uniqueness. And I remember sharing that with him, and he'd say, that would be embarrassing for me. And I was like, no, just like you said, it's not embarrassing, it's fulfilling. And so just that dynamic is so different. So really, really interesting. I'm looking at a couple of the questions. And so you said here around leading up, because that was, and I think going back, I think that was smart leading up from a coaching standpoint, because many people leaders don't want to start with themselves. You kind of hook them in about being a better leader to others.
Now you understand. Yes.
Yeah, and then they kind of back into it when they kind of get that whole idea of trying to understand others to themselves.
You figured it out. So leading up, it's part of the reason that leading up is first is because I get hired by CEOs. I generally don't get called by the HR department or the client themselves. It's usually a CEO who calls and says, "I heard you're the fixer. Like, I got this person who I want to promote so badly. They need to be, see something or other, but they don't speak up in a meeting, or they're a bull in a china closet, or something like that." So the first thing I do is, like, how do we make you a trusted advisor? How do we make you not scary to the CEO? Like, how do we get people to know you're on their team? Because drivers often come in with so much energy and are so sure of themselves that a CEO who might not be the same type will be intimidated or feel like they're it's not a safe place for them. Even though they need challenge, they need all that stuff, they also need safe places. So how do you use that energy so that you're supporting your CEO rather than scaring your CEO? And so leading up, we get a quick hit, but also as we're doing the leading up, as we're leading across, as we're learning to work with our peers, now all the fingers start pointing back at you. So using leading up and being a trusted advisor, using leading on a team of other leaders, using leading other people, all the fingers point back to you. So the last part of the book is leading you. And since we've already done all this work on how there's no problems with other people ever, it's always, always, always you, 100% responsibility. Leading you is really easy at the end, and it's just tying up some bows.
So do you have some people who have a hard time with that? I imagine you do, but it sounds like the sequence, it's going back to what I said earlier, the motivation. You want to be a best leader, you want to lead others, you want to lead teams. It
Yeah,
kind of comes
there's
back
always
to
resistance. There's always resistance. You and I are spiritual guys. I'm again, I'm a feeling guy. So if I'm coaching a thinker, they're not going to buy into my way of being. They're usually going to be like, why do I have to say good morning? Why can't we just get right down to business? Why do I have to ask about people's families? Why do I have to care about this stuff? Can't I just get the job done? You can, but if you want to be CEO, you can't.
So, and talking to someone who is that thinker or the engineering background and all that, and say, this is only 3 minutes. You can handle 3 minutes, right? And trying to
Yes.
get to know that because here's the payoff. Yes, you got to go through it, but it's only 3 minutes.
And what's really interesting is people who haven't done that their whole lives, who when they actually do stop and feel the relationship, it's
Yeah.
kind of like a drug because it's something they never had before, or they had with maybe their family or one other person or something like that. So the drivers, those people are usually don't take other people's feelings into account. They just kind of come into a room and take over. One of the exercises I do for my clients who are like that, who either have anger issues or scare people or intimidating, I say, I just want you for 2 weeks. You're going to walk into a room and you're going to watch. Do people light up? Do people close down? Do people start talking and sharing? Do people stop talking? What happens when you walk in the room?
Yeah.
And the ones who actually do that exercise are absolutely shocked at their impact on the vibe of a room. And they
Wow.
never knew that before.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they just come in and take over, and they've been rewarded for all that. So this may lead into this. You have this tool called the Boss Empathy Map. Can you walk us through how leaders use this tool and for themselves?
So I use it for the boss, and I also use it for peers. It's real. Again, when you're working with other leaders, having this grid where you start to learn, and it only takes like 15 minutes. If you took 15 minutes and sat down with a piece of paper and you just thought about what are their values, what are their triggers,
Yeah.
what scares them? What are their goals? What's the vision? What's their family like? And we call it boss bingo, right? And if you can't fill in the grid, that's great. Now you know where your work is. Now you go in and you have a conversation and say, hey, you know what? I would love to be a better trusted advisor to you. And I'm kind of not clear on the things that you value in communication. Do you want just the headlines? Do you need to get to the point? Do you want all the supporting data? Are you analytical? What do you need from me? And
Yeah.
doing that research, just automatically, just even talking about saying you're doing that research and want to know that elevates you so much in the eyes of the people you're talking to.
Yeah. So that is really good. I love the term the boss bingo. In one of the tools I have these tools called leadership keys, and they're
Mm,
kind of the basic keys of what you need to do. And so one of them is probably very similar to what you have. Lead is managing stakeholders and managing up. And from my focus is a little bit more Myers-Briggs related, but it is that same thing. How do they deal with
exactly.
conflict? How do they deal with conflict? Do they want the details? What's the best way to influence them? How to disagree with them? I mean, those would all be boss bingo squares. I love it.
One of the most fun meetings you can have is if like you do the Myers-Briggs for everybody on the leadership team. When I do Enneagram for all the people on the leadership team, I bring them all into the room and they start to understand that a
Yeah.
perfectionist, the Enneagram 1, the strict perfectionist, his or her whole life is about getting things right. There's right and wrong, and that's so important that if you criticize that person, right, they're gonna crumble. You have to take into account that they will beat themselves up more than you will beat them up. So you have,
Uh-huh.
and when you start to share with people different ways of communication, all of a sudden empathy starts to show up in the room and understanding.
And so you have them because I do this with Myers-Briggs. I have a group I'm thinking about next week. I have 15 leaders for 2 days next week. And Myers-Briggs, I have them in their like-minded group and then kind of speaking to the others. What's good about the Myers-Briggs, sometimes it's only going to be kind of four areas, the subtypes where you
Mm.
got the eight, for Enneagram. But do you do that also, where you kind of have them speak with all the ones together, all the twos
No, I
together?
no, I do it all in one big circle,
Okay.
and I have them all talk in one. There is an advanced Teams Enneagram certification, where they have like a diagram on the floor and you have everybody move to those things.
Okay. Right,
I
right,
just
right.
I just find having people speak, and then what I do is I have them give feedback to each other,
Yeah.
keeping in mind what they just learned about those personality
And
types.
so feedback in what way? Just
Uh,
any feedback or
oh no, yeah, I say I want you to give them one thing that they're doing well,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and even better if. And you want to see grown men and women sweat.
Yeah.
But at the end, the first round is always you're so good at this and this and this, and it would be even better if we could have more time for you with you. And it's a real softball, but they sweat just even doing that. But then when you get it in their body, and then let's say you have a 2-day workshop, then you can go a little bit deeper, and now you can say let's have some real meaty conversations, and you put them in triads and do that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I've done that, and it takes trust. That's what you're saying. You can't, like, for anybody listening, you're not going to say, "Oh, I got some tools," and you're going to do that. You got to better read them, and is there enough trust? But also notice what Mark said. Here's what you're doing well, and here's what I'd like to see more of, or that would be the language I always use more of. You're not saying you don't do this or this is a weakness. It's a soft landing for feedback, more of. I love for you, and sometimes you said it. I'd say, what could they dial up? You took a shower this morning and it's too cold. You put hot 1 or 2 notches. What could they dial up so it's easy for them to do it versus, oh, I had this training and I got to do all this stuff. It's too much.
Right. But you're right. Establishing the trust in the beginning of any workshop is the most important thing.
All right, Mark. This is go. I'm looking at the chat. We got a next break. This is going fast.
Two
So,
farsighted men not looking at the chat.
right. Details? What are details? So, um, you've been listening to Leadership Development News. We're talking with Mark Silverman. Mark J. Silverman is his website, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Leadership Development News, profiles and practice of top performers. I'm Dr. Rowie Nadler. My website is drrowienadler.com. Dr. Kathy Greenberg goes by drkathygreenberg.com. She's not here with us today, but I'm sure she's going to be listening. She's going to be upset, Mark, that she's missed this, but hopefully she can listen to it. And Mark J. Silverman is his website. And so say again the resource, because I am going to go and grab that resource that you talked about. And so just say that one again that's on there.
So my book, Only Tens, Confront Your To-Do List, Transform Your Life. It's about getting out of overwhelm. For me, it was about, having ADHD and starting a business and trying to figure out how to do that. It's free on my website, and you can get a hard copy or an electronic copy.
So I'm going to encourage our listeners to get that. I'm going to do it because, like I said at the beginning, we're all on overwhelm. And how do we, in the moment, and so I'm all about moment mastery. How in the moment can you do something different? Doesn't take a lot. Look at how different Mark's life is. And how in the moment can you make a decision that's going to help you? And so you kind of catch those instincts. I should do this, and then we put it off. Well, while you're still in I should do this, could you go do it? Because your should become kind of an action. And so it sounds like you're going to have some tools with that. So Mark, one of the things that you have here is getting to emotional intelligence faster as a success trait, and how we are reactive and angry quicker. So say a little bit how you go about that. Obviously, my whole career has been around emotional intelligence and zeroing in on the how to. What do you do? We know we should have it. We know you can measure it, but there's still a gap of what do I do? How do I get more confidence? How do I build more teams? How do I influence people? So
I would point to your resource, the Emotional Brilliance, because I'm so fascinated by that, because emotional intelligence is kind of like the median. Emotional brilliance is where you're going to shine and where you're going to get promoted and where you're going to create everything that you want. For me, one of the things I teach my clients is that the person who's grounded and centered in any given situation has the power. If you lose your shit, you lose power. If you react, you lose power. So if you, and we all do lose, we all do lose it.
right.
The question is, how fast can you put yourself back on track? In your personal relationship with your spouse or your significant other, the first person who gets sane is usually the one who sends the olive branch. So we want to do this in a business standpoint also.
Yeah.
But you can't do it in the moment, if you don't practice. If you don't practice on the small things. One of my clients, I was hired because he's huge, former professional athlete, now in the C-suite, and was scaring everybody because he had anger issues. And one of the days I was talking to him, and I noticed he was a little overweight, and he's a former athlete. And I said, "So I'm curious, when was the last time you were in the gym?" And he said, "Oh, I haven't been in the gym for about month and a half, 2 months." I said, "Great. You and I are not going to have another conversation until you send me a picture of you in the gym 8 times in the next 2 weeks." He's like, "What?" I said, "I don't even care if you do anything in the gym. Just send a picture of you in the gym." Because why? We're talking about my anger issues. I said, "Right. You're like an ADHD 5-year-old that we're trying to make sit at a desk. If we don't get that energy out, if you're not hitting a heavy bag, if you're not lifting, if you're not throwing weights around, how are we going to get you so that your energy is calm and grounded enough in any situation to make a different choice?" And that was a game changer. The CEO, like a month later, said, "What did you do with him?" I'm like, "It wasn't rocket science. The man needed to go to the gym." But it was also practicing, practicing noticing what your triggers are, like what sets you off. Use that. So we'll find out, like in being feeling like I'm disrespected. I can't stand being disrespected in a meeting. Great. Let's look forward to the next time you're disrespected. Let's find out what happens. What do you make it mean? How do you take it on that you're disrespected? Let's practice when you're not in the meeting, so that when you're in the meeting, you'll go, "Oh shit, I just took the bait again." Right.
Yeah.
Then we talk about breathing, and we talk about how do you breathe through a trigger? Oh, how do you recognize you're triggered? And then go, "Oh, I should shut up now." Now, what do you say? Like, again, the people with anger issues, one of the things I say is, like, you can't be inauthentic. If you're pissed off, if you're losing it, and like you're talking to an employee or you're talking to a coworker, and like you're losing it. You can't go, oh, I'm fine, when you're not. You can say, hey, by the way, I'm so sorry. I'm triggered right now. I'm angry right now, but it's not at you. It's the situation. I'm overwhelmed by the situation. I don't want you to take this on. Even if the person did something wrong, no human being, every human being is a precious child of God. They don't deserve to be screamed at, right? So you just like, let's take a minute. I'm going to go back to my desk. We'll talk about this in about a half hour or something like that. That is so much better than allowing yourself to run roughshod on someone and saying something, that you can't take back. So it's all the things that people don't want to talk about. Like I have a personal trainer. He gives me stretches. If I don't stretch, I get hurt at the gym. If I stretch, I don't get hurt at the gym. So all these breathing exercises, exercise, play. Like, when was the last time you played golf? Golf is not a luxury. Golf is something men especially need to do, because that's the only time they go out and talk to other men and actually feel camaraderie. If you don't feel that, how are you going to be your best at work?
Yeah. I love it. I love this conversation. So part of that is around kind of the anger, and you have to catch it. And so that's where the self-awareness comes from. And then the self-control comes from, what am I going to do differently? So you got to catch it, and then you got to redirect. So I always kind of talk about catch and redirect. And you've been talking about our book, Emotional Brilliance. We have an acronym in there of what do you do with emotions, and it's called NAME, NAME. N is for notice and normalize it. Oh, I have this trigger. It's normal for X, Y, and Z. So I've named it. And then A is accept it. And so that's that part of saying,
That's the hardest part.
I'm laughing because that's, of these 3 or 4 things I'm going to say, that is the hardest. How do you accept what you don't want to? So that's a whole journey.
Mm-hmm.
And then the manage is, the M is manage, and then the E is express. And so there's a lot of tools under the manage. There's a lot of things. You mentioned them. You walk away, you take a deep breath, you manage your thoughts, you manage your actions. And then do you express it? Sometimes yes, sometimes you just express it yourself. And then how do you express it? So for a leader in a team, how do you say, I got this trigger, and how do you express it in a way that is authentic, and maybe you're vulnerable, or maybe you just acknowledge it to yourself. So that idea of the name piece is helpful.
If that acceptance piece is so hard, but there's kind of a law in the universe that you can't transform anything until you allow it, until you accept it, right? Until you own it and go, this is just something that I have been conditioned over. It's not me. It's something that's come from childhood. It's something I've been conditioned to. Now, okay, this is mine. Now it's my responsibility. Now, what do I do with it? And what tools can I have? What do I need therapy? Do I need, do I need visualization? Because one of the things that we do with my clients is I have them visualize being in the CEO's office, and the CEO puts them on the spot and contradicts them in the middle of the thing. What are you going to do? Can you feel it? Let's feel it. Let's really feel that, right? And then let's go through exactly let's go through your name protocol. We're in a safe place. You practice, when you're in the meeting, you'll remember some of it.
So some of that in psychology, they call that systematic desensitization. When you have a fear, and maybe we'll talk about anything on the fear part of it, you do want to visualize it, calm yourself down. Visualize the next step, calm yourself down. And in a sense, you're doing that with the visualization. And the same thing, that athletes do. What about you talk about anger and secondary emotion to fear. Like when there's fear, how are you dealing with someone with fear? Fear to contradict the CEO or a board member.
Yes, I find anger as a secondary emotion to either fear or sadness. There's either one, and we don't like to feel either one of them. Especially men. Men prefer to go to anger. It's a little more powerful than to say I'm scared or I'm sad. Oh God, grief. Who wants to feel grief? I'd rather be pissed off. But for fear, I'm a very fearful person naturally. Everything I've ever done, I've done scared. I was nervous getting on this podcast. Like I get nervous interviewing people on my podcast. I've just learned to accept before I get on a stage, I'm going to lose my breath, no matter how many hundreds of times I've done it. So I've learned to make friends with fear. I've learned to deal with my body when it's in fear. I can learn to breathe when and look like I'm normal, right? But so and it's never gone away. So I love teaching people about fear. I'm like, I can teach you because I'm scared of everything.
Yeah.
I was scared to write a book. I was scared to write a leadership book. That was crazy to write a leadership book in this day and age. And I did it anyway, right? But I think fear is a practice. I think when I'm or people that I coach are regularly leaning into their fear, that muscle works. They get used to the feeling of being scared. And then when you don't do it for a while, it's like going back to the beginning. You're like, oh my God, I'm scared. Oh wait, I used to be able to do this. There's a experiment they call the cold shower experiment, where you turn the shower on cold and then you go to step in. But the first thing you notice is your apprehension before you're going to step into the shower. Notice that in your body. Notice what your mind says. Notice how you're frozen before you can do it. Right. And then now you know what fear feels like in your body. Now, can you override that and step into the cold shower? Right. And that's a practice. And I think that the people who, the bros who do the cold plunges talk about that all the time. When I do the cold plunge, that means I can go do anything.
Yeah. Well, it's that transference. In my history, I worked at these Outward Bound programs, and we do ropes courses, and people would get on top of a pole and jump out. And not only to do that, but what does that tell about other fear situations? And so kind of being in the moment. But before we leave, I want you to talk about leading across, and the reason why that's important. We just got there 3 minutes. I find that leaders don't think enough about if they get that role. Now they're leading somebody who they're in competition with, and you talk about co-opetition.
I had these other leadership coaches who read my book who said, it's not co-opetition. We're a family. We want to build cohesiveness. I'm like, I want to be real. Like, yes, I want to build cohesiveness, but we're competing for resources. We're competing for, to be noticed. We're competing in so many different ways. Our egos are going to be in the room. But so what leading across for me is learning your people. So like, if you want the promotion, do you want to be the person who says he was a brown noser, she was, she only got the job for this or whatever, and they don't get support you? Or do you want to have a team of people going, I wanted that job, but I'll follow Relly into the, wherever they go? Like, do you want to create people holding the ladder for you while you climb it? And if you do that, you have to learn about them, learn about their fears, learn about their ambitions, learn about their values, all that stuff. And you want to play fairly, right? You want to, like, when you play a sport, you're going to play as hard as you can to win. But if you play fairly, it's a great game, right? So the same thing for co-opetition, but it's definitely junior high school all over again. Every one of those feelings come up.
And I think that exactly like you're saying, now you're leading this person, and you want to deal with their resentment that you got the job versus them. And so while your peers, that's the time you want to build the emotional bank account.
Brilliant.
So let me leave you with our little lightning round here. We don't always get a chance to do this. And you just fill in the blank.
Okay.
Leadership is?
Transformative.
At work, it's all about?
Relationships.
And then this one's more for you. The best way that you recharge during the workday is?
Naps. I need a nap every day. I'm 62 years old. I can do everything a 30-year-old can do, but I just need my 15-minute nap.
How old are you?
62.
Okay, you don't look 62 at all for our audience, but that's great. So the naps are working. For me, it's a similar, but it's meditation. So probably after this, we're going to sign off, and I'll make sure I get my.
You go meditate. I'm going to take a nap.
All right. Well, Mark, this has been great. Mark J. Silverman. I'm going to go to his website, download that book around overwhelm. We're all on overwhelm. And you've been listening to Leadership Development News. Continue to tune up your performance. Thanks, folks.